Okay, guys, I think we're going to go get, excuse me. We're going to go ahead and get started. And I would like to welcome Drew Rayburn, and he's going to be presenting on Resilient and Connected Network. So please take it away, Drew.
Great, thank you so much. And I hope your conference is going well. I'm sorry I can't be there in person. It's just a great opportunity to share with you. And thanks to Peter for originally reaching out to invite us to participate. I'm going to give an overview of a spatial analysis product called the Resilient and Connected Network. And I'm going to talk about the analysis, try not to dive too deeply into technical details, and really focus on how we're using the analysis here in Colorado to inform what we call climate-informed or climate-resilient conservation. And before I get started, I want to show you one other thing that might be of interest to the group, that we will be hiring in the summer, fall of this year, a full-time conservation geographer position. And this is the first time we've had a position like this. It was part of what I've been doing to add some capacity to our geospatial team. So yeah, this will be a great opportunity. It'll be a full-time job based out of our Boulder office with a hybrid option, maybe 1 or 2 days a week in the office. And you'll see this come out either summer or early fall of this year. And if you have any questions about that, Peter has my email, and I'll be happy to talk to you about that offline. Okay, Nature Conservancy. Probably most people know at least something about TNC. Just very briefly, we work locally and globally. We're in all 50 states, more than 70 countries. We've got about 4,500 employees around the world. Our mission is to conserve the lands and waters on which all life depends. So we're focused on being collaborative, bipartisan, really focusing on our impacts, our results for both nature and for people. And we ground our work, this is a direct connection to what I'll be talking about for the rest of the slides, that we ground our work in the places identified by our science, which maximizes our ability to affect change for nature and the people that rely on it. So I won't go into all the work we do in Colorado. I just wanted to briefly mention that we do have our classic land protection portfolio. We also work on water, especially in the Colorado River Basin, which many of you know is very important right now, front page news about our water challenges in Colorado and in the Western US. We have a large body of work focused on forests, both in Colorado and across the Western US. We're reforesting areas burned by wildfire and also improving management, especially along the wild and urban interface where people live and work. A lot of people don't know we have an urban program as well. We do have a focus in the Metro Denver area. Some of it relates to planting trees and increasing tree canopy, but there's also some conservation prioritization work there that I'll touch on later. And then of course, our climate program, which is still emerging, still kind of being shaped. And really climate is the focus of really all of our work from the perspective of mitigation or adaptation or both, because we feel that climate resilience is a combination of both mitigation and adaptation. So a little context. I think probably most of us know this, but this was confirmed in the 6th assessment report from the IPCC that ecosystems everywhere around the world are already being altered, have been altered by climate change, some beyond the tipping point. And at least 10% of our species are at a high risk of extinction. And of course, there's also the social consequences, our food security, water resources, and how people and communities are displaced. So any additional warming will increase those impacts for both people and nature. And as we could have been saying for the last 30 years, the time for action is now. So in Colorado, we know that climate change has been happening and is accelerating. The evidence dates back several decades, if not longer. The average Colorado temperatures have increased by 2 degrees since 1977, and historically, similar amounts of change have taken thousands of years. Snowpacks have decreased since the 1950s across most of the Western US, including in Colorado. We're seeing those snowpacks melting 15 to 30 days earlier than several decades ago, which changes runoff timing, and our precipitation is shifting more towards rain and less towards snow. And then of course, there's the overarching issue of drought. Projections for Colorado, it's going to be challenging here, I think. Under an intermediate emissions scenario, all the climate models project a warmer Colorado by 2050, somewhere between 2.5 to 5 degrees Fahrenheit. And Denver will likely feel more like Pueblo on average, And one quote that's from the Colorado Water Conservation Board is that our warmest summers from our past may become the average summers in our future. And under a high emission scenario, which we really should all do our best to avoid, models project warming in Colorado as high as 6.5 degrees, which would make Denver feel more like Albuquerque. So addressing climate change, right? Confronting the dual crises of climate change and our ongoing biodiversity crisis. We know that land protection and habitat restoration and improving the management of lands and waters are critical for addressing both crises. But just doing these actions alone does not guarantee climate resilience for biodiversity, habitats, and ecosystem services on which people depend. So just like in real estate, the location of conservation actions is as important as the type and the pace and the scale and the durability of those actions. So of course, when we talk about location, we're talking about spatial prioritization, which is why we're all here today. There's a lot of talk in Colorado about what's the gap in our conservation? Where should we be going as a state? What's the current state of conservation in Colorado? And you'll hear talk about 30 by 30 and other sort of numerical metrics. But for us, and especially for me, the gap of Colorado's conservation isn't really a number per se. It's the extent of protection, restoration, and improved management that's needed for climate resilient ecosystems on which both nature and people depend. And so when we think about these conversations around the global 30 by 30, and if you're not familiar with that, it's the idea of protecting 30% of the earth for nature. You also hear 50 by 50, so protecting 50% of the earth by 2050. This is 30% is by 2030, so hence 30 by 30. So how do we make meaningful contributions to these national and global conversations while also ensuring here in our state long-term climate resilience in ways that meet the needs locally? And so what is the Resilient Connected Network? It's an analysis. It shows or it estimates the lands nationwide required to sustain biodiversity and ecological function under future climate change if they're protected or otherwise conserved. And it's the result of a 10-year national analysis that was led by around 150 scientists, many of whom were from TNC. And we see it as a starting point for coordinating to increase our collective conservation impact. So it's a planning tool. It's not the plan itself. On the right, you're seeing the RCN, as we call it, for Colorado. We'll talk about what all the colors here momentarily. Conceptually, we also see it as a foundation for accelerating climate resilient conservation while also integrating other priorities. And we'll show an example of that towards the end. And what that means is that we've got to increase the amount of conservation work we're doing in Colorado if we're going to be prepared for future climate change. And that's also why we work to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. So both mitigation and adaptation, preparing for the future, it's all important. And right now, we're just not really moving fast enough, especially as a conservation community across the state. So TNC is working to accelerate the pace and scale of climate resilient conservation. This is a terrestrial analysis. I'll note that there's a freshwater analysis hopefully coming later in 2023. I won't talk about that, but just think about this as pretty much terrestrial focused. Okay, so here's the same map. I want to first point out on the bottom left, we have two gray areas. These are the land areas of federally recognized tribes. TNC has not yet secured permission to share some of the data, including the overarching data set you're looking at from these lands, and we're having those conversations over time, but that's what the gray areas are there for. There's really three colors here, and I'll explain the colors after I explain the subcomponents. So there's essentially three sets of models that are combined to create the raster surface on the left. I'll talk a little bit about the details, what we call site resilience, climate flow, let's really think of it as connectivity, and recognized biodiversity. Those three components are combined into the raster on the left, where dark green shows the areas that are the most resilient, the most connected, and have that recognized biodiversity. The other two colors are still important. So blue is the most resilient and the most connected, but there's not confirmed or recognized biodiversity, usually because surveys have not been done. And then the light green are resilient areas with recognized biodiversity, but they're just not as connected as relatively as the rest of the landscape. So it is a national data set. I just wanted to show you that. You see lots of gray areas, so lots of land areas of federally recognized tribes, especially in the Western US. And the connectivity portion of this analysis really speaks to the north-south connections, like the migrating hawks and eagles and other birds, but also connections in other directions. And the underlying methodology for the flow model, or the connectivity model, is derived from circuitscape, which is a movement model created by actually by a TNC scientist some years ago. And that circuitscape analysis has been used to create this nice graphic that just illustrates general movement corridors for mammals, birds, and amphibians. And of course, this is showing it in one direction. And we know it's not, it's bidirectional, if not more. But just conceptually, circuitscape treats the landscape like a circuit board. So it models movement like electricity flowing over a circuit board, or like water moving over a river bottom sort of thing. Okay, so I said 3 components to the model. Very briefly, we can talk more about this offline. Climate resilient sites are looking at individual areas on the landscape and rating them based on things like how diverse are those microclimates? Is there a lot of diversity of the different types of landscapes? Are there tall areas and or mountains and valleys and wet areas and dry areas, things of that nature? How intact are these local landscapes? How locally connected are they? And it's not looking at connections across the landscape, it's looking at the areas themselves. And resilience estimates the potential for a site to maintain biodiversity and ecological function as climate changes. So the dark green, I won't go through all the colors, but the darker the green, the more resilient a site is in this model. And you'll see a lot of brown areas. This model was not designed to evaluate climate resilience of heavily modified areas like cities and roads and oil and gas fields and crop fields. I'll make that point a couple of times because it's really important for the interpretation. You'll see a lot of brown in areas that are pretty heavily modified by human activity, and even some gray that are fully developed. So what does this look like in the real world? This is Silverjack Reservoir near Montrose. This is an area that scores very highly on the resilience analysis, and you can just see why that's the case. You've got a river, or at least a portion of a reservoir. You've got tall, rocky areas, dense forest, open areas, gravelly portions of the channel. It's just, it's a very diverse landscape. That's really what this photo is illustrating. And then if you take one of the submodels, I don't know if this is landscape diversity or just something more simple like slope and aspect, but you can see that the portion of where we're looking at in sort of the real photo on the top, and the red circle indicates where that is. And then the red line shows you the score. And you'll see that this is in that kind of really dark green area that indicates a really high degree of landscape diversity and ultimately site resilience for future climate change. The second big component is connectivity and climate flow. If you're not familiar with flow models, the word flow can be a little confusing. So we focus on just really talking about as connectivity. And just think of it as linkages that allow species to move across landscapes in response to climate change. And anything that would inhibit that movement, roads are a great example, other forms of modification would lower that score. Different types of habitat fragmentation. So the dark blue, really the darker the blue, the more connected. It's a little more complicated than that because the model includes kind of a constrained flow and a diffuse flow, but it's for these purposes, just think of the more blue, the more connected the landscape. And that relates to, mentioned fragmentation or landscape disturbance. This is an unrelated model to ours, but it's still very important. That's developed by the Colorado Natural Heritage Program, and it just is a landscape disturbance index, or an LDI, and it does a similar dissection of the landscape and rating based on the degree of disturbance. And of course, you can see our cities and our roads and other features here, but these are the types of data sets we're looking at when we're thinking about connectivity in Colorado. And biodiversity value, quite simply, these are just areas where there are intact habitats, rare species, or really special ecological communities. But it's only based on the available data. So areas that are not green, it doesn't mean there's nothing alive there, or there's not anything of conservation value. It just means usually that it hasn't been surveyed formally. And these types of models need those formal survey data. So together, those 3 inputs integrate biodiversity with the abiotic features that will support it under future climate change. Now, I made a point about this being a model that was suitable for intact landscape evaluation. And I want to show you just a snapshot of the Fort Collins area. And you can see those 3 colors, dark green, blue, and light green. And there's this huge gap around Fort Collins. And so you may already know why, But if you don't, let's look at this portion of the landscape and really emphasize that this model is not rating highly developed landscapes well. And that's fine. We all have to have food produced from our croplands. It's important for our economies. But this model will treat croplands as developed and will not score them as climate resilient. So to do a full analysis for the state, you would have to have models that are specifically designed for our croplands or our cities or other types of land use where there's a high degree of modification. And we say this because we don't want people to feel as if like we're saying that there's anything wrong with this landscape. It's a very productive agricultural landscape and a very important part of Colorado's Front Range economy and beyond. So I'm just going to make that point a couple times to minimize any chance for misinterpretation around the model itself if you were to look at it on your own. And I should say this is a freely available model. It's online. You can run the analysis yourself. And I often teach workshops. I think Peter has seen me teach at least one of these in the past. But I teach workshops on this, and I'm always available to talk more about this because we're only going to scratch the surface today. But I promise you, anyone could be trained to run this model very easily. Simply upload a shapefile in a zip format, and the model will ingest that shapefile and run the report for you. And then it's really a matter of just understanding what the implications of the results are. Okay. So if you look at Colorado, we're really lucky nationwide. 54% of Colorado is in the RCN, as we say. And that's great. I mean, it really speaks to the conservation values here in our state. But where are we now with conservation? Like, how are we doing and where do we want to go? And how do we set these statewide priorities? And this is a lot of what TNC works on with a number of local, regional, and statewide organizations. And on the left is a data set that's curated by the Colorado Natural Heritage Program called COMAP, the Colorado Ownership, Management, and Protection Database. And I really like this data set. It's updated annually. We contribute our land protection data to this. It shows where all the different land ownerships are in the state. It shows what's been formally protected in different levels of protection. We use this a lot, and we're very happy that CNHP has got this. So when we're thinking about kind of where we are now with our baseline, simply we could look at the COMAP and look at where all the lands have been protected and compare that to something like the RCN that shows all the lands that we would like to see protected over time as much as possible to ensure a climate resilient future for species and ecosystems. Okay? And if we do that, and if we collapse everything on the left into just a single category of protection, which is what you're looking at in the kind of the orange, if you see green or blue, you're looking at resilient and connected lands that are completely unprotected. And by that, I don't mean that they're being poorly managed or that if they're privately owned, the families are not doing a good job taking care of the property. What I mean is that they lack legal protection from conversion. And so they're vulnerable. And there's a lot of Colorado that's green and blue on this map. In fact, it's around 16 million acres of our state that lack formal protection and that are really important for species and ecosystems under a changing climate. So we look at this map a lot and we talk about like, what does this mean for our work? And a lot of what TNC does is work in the southeast corner of the state right now. And you can see how much unprotected green and even a little blue there are down in southeast Colorado. It's a huge opportunity space. It's also a very challenging landscape in which to work. So lots of unprotected in the eastern US. Of course, you can start to see those patterns in other parts of the state. And it turns out that there's large chunks of unprotected RCN all across Colorado, lots of different community types and ecosystems and conservation values, but just looking at it from this perspective, you get a sense of what the opportunity is. So in addition to these 16 million acres of privately owned land that lack any formal protection, there's millions more acres of Colorado that might need better management or even increased protection if that's something that we decide as a society we'd like to see. Lots of opportunities. I would also note that the fragmented corridors and sort of isolated patches could serve as restoration targets. I'll mention this again in a second, but for instance, the Platte River corridor in northeastern Colorado, you can see a large gap of missing green and blue that would probably have been there, and perhaps that could be an impetus for some restoration work. Okay, so one of the things that this allows us to do is add in a lot of other priorities. Remember, we said this is a planning tool, it's not the plan itself. So As we know in GIS, it's something that we do a lot of. So you can think about adding in some additional wildlife corridor data, maybe from Colorado Parks and Wildlife, freshwater resources, public access and recreation, environmental health and justice, different types of planning regions in which to do these types of analyses. And there's a couple different agency planning regions shown here. And then of course, there's many others, other types of biodiversity data, different types of threats, management overlays, tribal priorities, ecosystem services, renewable energy, transportation, economic and other factors. The point is that it's amenable to adding in additional data and running, more complicated analyses. Okay, so the 10 minutes I have left, I'm going to focus on applications and make this feel a little more real for you, I hope. So you might hear a dog in the background too. My wife's out of town, so I'm taking care of our 2 young dogs here at the house. So the first application I'll mention is what we call SHPE, or the Southern High Plains Initiative. This is how we refer to the work in Southeast Colorado. And we are using the RCN as a foundation for increasing collaboration amongst the 5 states in Southern Colorado, and inspiring states to contribute to this broader conservation vision. So in this case, we're stacking a lot of other data together, just like I mentioned before, but this is our priority, one of our priority conservation projects for TNC in Colorado. We also used the RCN in the development of the first ever statewide private lands conservation plan, which wrapped up late last year and is just beginning to start being implemented. And this plan will really pull together all the private land practitioners, conservation practitioners in the state, and try to provide a unifying vision. And as part of that, we use the RCN to sort of speak to climate resiliency, in addition to all the other priorities for private land conservation. We use the RCN for a Metro Denver Regional Conservation Assessment. It's the 6-county area around Denver. And this is was one of the inputs to help us think about prioritizing protection and restoration. Actually, I should have said 7-county region. And it was integrated with a lot of other biodiversity and habitat quality data and customized to be able to share with some of our city and county stakeholders in these areas. And then Rocky Mountain Wild and Wild Connections was using the RCN to do some climate refugium modeling in the Southern Rocky Mountains. And I need to check in with them and see where they are in this process. But again, the common theme here is that by using the RCN, you're bringing that climate resiliency lens to bear and creating space to add in other priorities more specific to the planning regions or the conservation goals or the stakeholders involved. More recently, this NOCO Places initiative is one of the state outdoor regional partnerships. And NOCO Places is a coalition of 8 county, state, and federal public land agencies in north central Colorado. And I live in Jefferson County. I live in Arvada, about 20 minutes west of Denver. So these agencies are working together to address this challenge of really high visitation to these public lands and growing population and all of these conservation values, with this goal of protecting and conserving the resources while providing equitable access and quality recreation experiences, not just now, but into the future. So the RCN is one of the data sets that's being used to develop this vision for regional recreation and conservation by this group of agencies. And again, oftentimes, we present these data as sort of that climate resiliency lens, because it turns out we don't have a lot of great climate resiliency data sets statewide in Colorado specific to conservation. As a restoration ecologist, I just wanted to put one more plug in for using the RCN to inform the restoration and reconnection of fragmented landscapes. We know that climate resiliency is severely impacted by fragmentation and disturbance. So there's so many opportunities to connect fragmented landscapes and improve connectivity in Colorado. And we think the RCN could be used to help prioritize some of those key corridors. And just a big plug for wildlife crossings, and as one of the most important things we can do to increase that connectivity for the benefit of both people and nature. And I'd love to have a little more time to spend bringing the RCN to bear on some of the ongoing discussions on future wildlife crossings in Colorado that are so important. And just a very brief mention also, renewable energy siting. So there's going to be a rapid expansion of renewable energy in Colorado, and that's important for meeting our state climate goals. But at the same time, that expansion is poised to have some significant negative impacts on biodiversity and habitat because all that renewable energy infrastructure has to go somewhere. And so we're looking at supporting like low impact or what we call conservation aligned renewable energy siting, trying to avoid or minimize those ecological impacts while still supporting the renewable energy transition. And so the Nature Conservancy recently completed a West-wide analysis of renewable energy called the Power of Place, which you might be interested in diving into more. And skipping all the details, the Resilient and Connected Network was one of the inputs into that analysis that concluded that it will be possible to accelerate renewable energy development while avoiding or minimizing impacts to our most sensitive lands and species. We did not do that analysis, but we're working on applying it here in Colorado. Okay, so I'm going to end by showing you one of the analyses I did with using the RCN, and this is for Sandstone Ranch in Douglas County. It's now part of their open space portfolio. It's a beautiful site. This is a 2,038-acre publicly accessible historic ranch, now open space park in Douglas County. This is what it looks like. It's a large and very historic property. It's got beautiful views, red rock formations, and habitat for lots of species of wildlife, including elk, bear, and mountain lion. It's open to non-motorized trail-based recreation, and through its protection, we could serve the historic ranch operations and expanded the open space park system, and it's adjacent to the Pike National Forest. So this is an actual snapshot from the tool itself online. And the red in the middle is the shapefile outline of Sandstone Ranch. So at this point, we've uploaded the zipped shapefile into the tool, and it's reprojected it and shown it on the map. And then zooming into the same location, I've now turned on the RCN layer. And so you can see those three colors that we talked about. And the entirety of this 2,000-acre property is squarely within the RCN. And the only difference between a dark green and a dark blue is that there wasn't a comprehensive set of biodiversity data for the model to use. So really think of the entire thing as highly resilient and connected, as is the whole surrounding landscape. So if this property wasn't protected and converted to, I'll just say a parking lot, I don't see that happening, of course, but if it hadn't been protected and fully converted, you could see that there would have been a giant hole in the landscape in terms of both resilience and connectivity. So we use this tool to talk about the value of land protection actions, to give people more discussion points when they're talking about trade-offs and land protection decisions, and to give people some climate language that they can weave into descriptions of biodiversity or public access or whatever the values might be that people are trying to conserve through these land protection actions. Okay. And then the other thing I'll show here is that this is a national data set of protected lands called GAP, G-A-P. It's not a great fit for Colorado, but this tool integrates it because this is a national tool. And so it integrated this national protection database. And so what you're seeing with the gray is the actual adjacency of the Pike National Forest. And the point is that this piece or this property is a part of a larger story. This land has already been protected. It's part of our national forest. And now we're essentially adding on another 2,000 acres of permanently protected land into this landscape. And of course, all of this comes with trade-offs. Land protection, you have to consider social values, local economic trade-offs. We're not saying that every land protection decision is easy. But in this case, this land was protected and is now part of the open space park system. So I'll close by reminding us of what I said earlier, what is our conservation gap? And for us, really, it's whatever that extent of protection, restoration, and improved management that will be needed for climate resilient ecosystems for nature and people. And trying to estimate what that gap is or that extent, we're using the RCN as a tool to help us do that. And the question we keep asking ourselves is, how do we make meaningful contributions towards this global 30 by 30 goal, while also ensuring long-term climate resilience for Colorado? And I'll end by just reminding that we are hiring a full-time conservation geographer later this year. And if you're interested in that, I'll put my email in the chat and you're welcome to reach out to me. And I'll stop with that. Thank you for your time.
I appreciate it. Okay, I know we have 1 minute. Were there any questions at all for Drew? That was a great presentation. Thank you so much for sharing.
Well, Thanks for letting me go a little long.
No, you're fine. We have one question and then we'll be two questions and then we'll.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Yeah, and if we don't get to them, please email me and I'll respond. But what's your first question?
Sure.
How does this relate to California's also 30 by 30 initiative? Or is there any connections with the methodologies that you're using versus California?
Well, so we're not doing 30 by 30 in Colorado. So we're suggesting that instead of setting a 30% goal for Colorado, that we should take a broader view and talk more about what that gap actually is. Colorado set a state goal for 30 by 30. California has set a state goal for 30 by 30. Colorado's not yet done that. So while there are global and national goals, some states are choosing to set specific 30% goals, and California is one that has done that. So they are using similar, this and other types of methodologies in California to really say, well, now what does that mean? And the question is 30% of what? Because we have to agree on what we're talking about in order to set that goal. So if you want me to provide more information, I can over email, but that's my really quick answer on that. And I can take the second question quickly if it's short.
Yeah, I was just curious. I'm guessing you can download this from the Nature Conservancy website onto your own desktop GIS software.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you can download the raw data, in raster form, and we can share information on how to do that. You can also, use the interactive tool. So if you want more information on application, please follow with me, drew.rayburn@tnc.org, and I'd be happy to provide more information.
All right. Thank you so much, Drew.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity, y'all, and good luck with the rest of your conference. And thank you so much for the opportunity to be with you today.
Thank you. Okay, we will be switching over to Carol in 2 seconds. Carol, you should be a co-host now.
Okay, can you hear me all right?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you.
All right, and so we're going to go ahead and get started with Carol Leideck from the U.S. Geological Survey, and she'll be showing us on demand custom topical maps with Topo Builder. Thank you. Please take it away, Carol.
Great, thanks, and hello everybody. Good to see you today, and happy Friday. And I will go ahead and show my slides. I'm going to stop my video while I do this. Okay, can you see a slide that says Topo Builder and on-demand topo?
Yep, we can see your screen. Yep, go ahead.
Okay, great. Alrighty. Well, hello again, everyone, and thank you to GISCO for time on the agenda today. My name is Carol Leideck, and I work for the U.S. Geological Survey National Geospatial Program as the National Map Liaison for New Mexico, Colorado, and Wyoming. Topographic maps became a signature product of the USGS because the public found them then and now to be a critical and versatile tool for viewing the nation's vast landscape. USGS topographic maps fall into 3 primary product categories, which are the historic topographic map collection, US Topo, and on-demand topos. The subject for this presentation is the Topo Builder application, which can be used to create on-demand topos. The Topo Builder is an application to make your own map on demand, where you want, within the United States and territories, in geospatial PDF or GeoTIFF, using the best available authoritative national map data. Topo Builder supports responsible resource management, sustainable energy development, natural hazard risk reduction, recreation and tourism, and public health and security. So let's take a look at the Topo Builder application and walk through some steps to produce an on-demand topo. The URL is topobuilder.nationalmap.gov. From the home screen, you can choose your map type. Currently, the only map type is a 7.5 minute on-demand topo, but additional product options will be added in future development cycles. The 7.5 minute topo will be selected by default, so there's no need to select it. You can then click the next button to confirm and continue with your selection. From the Maps tab, zoom to your area of interest. The application will guide you with a message to select your area of interest or to zoom in to display the 7.5 map grid. There are currently two options for map extent. With custom selection, which is selected by default, you click anywhere on the map to create your own 7.5 minute extent, which is shown here in blue. Or to make an on-grid map, choose the Select by Grids button and then click on one of the preset 7.5 minute grids, which is shown here as an orange box. Users can select standard map layers. By selecting the Edit Layers option, users can select which national map layers they would like included on their output maps. Simply uncheck any layers you do not want to include on your output maps. A user-defined content tag appears in the map card. The maps will be delivered with a user-defined content note in the marginalia as well, letting you know the content has been defined. Please note that this setting applies to all map products in a single order or cart. Every map in this order will have the same custom set of layers. To create maps with different custom layer settings, simply check out and then start a new order. Okay, once you have your layers, you can select your map format. Note the user-defined content tag that has appeared after selecting custom layers in the previous slide. That's just above where you see that green circle. Format options are the geospatial PDF or GeoTIFF. Geospatial PDF has limited mapping functions and can be viewed and printed without specialized software. This format is ideal for non-GIS specialists. GeoTIFF includes georeferenced information, so it can be used in the GIS software as well as image editors. Okay, custom contours are currently available through this application, and there is a contour smoothness guide. You can click the information icon to see detailed information on the contour smoothing options, and you'll see that these are low, medium, and high. Low means contours will be detailed with the least amount of smoothing. Medium is the default option and will produce contours similar to US Topo. High means contours will be very smooth. You can click the slider to select the appropriate smoothing level based on your needs. Contours are generated on the fly using the highest resolution, best available 3D elevation program data in the continental US, Alaska, or the US territories. The low smoothing option results in contours which portray the landscape in high detail. Detailed contours allow easier identification of surface features and landforms, and they're generally best for geology, geomorphology, and natural hazards. The medium smoothing option results in contours which are similar to contours on US topo maps. Topographic features have reduced detail for better readability, and these contours are best for things like recreation, geocaching and orienteering, physical science research, land management, and emergency response. For the high smoothing option, contours show a generalized view of the land. Smaller geographic features may be missing. The high smoothing option is best for thematic maps, urban planning, transportation management, and depiction of cultural features. For 1 to 24,000 scale maps, contour intervals are based on the range of elevation values in a single quad. These values are not absolute elevation values, just the spread of values, meaning a maximum to a minimum per quad. All contours are ultimately derived from the best available data in publicly accessible 3DEP repositories. The process of putting contours into an on-demand topo map first starts with 3DEP data production and moves to an MRF service where the 3DEP data is exposed and indexed. The MRF service allows quick querying and extraction of selected elevation data, which in turn is fed into a contour generation tool. 3DEP data production and the population of the MRF service happens outside of Topo Builder, as these are standard 3DEP processes. Steps 3 and 4 occur within the back end of Topo Builder. OPR stands for Original Product Resolution. This term is used in 3DEP to denote LiDAR point cloud and DEMS published at the original super high resolution of the collected LiDAR. OPRs can vary based on the quality level of the LiDAR, the specifications of the LiDAR collection project, and the LiDAR's spatial reference. OPR, in terms of cell size, is typically 1 meter or 3 feet, but not always. 3DEP publishes OPR DEMS, but also standardizes all DEMS into 1 meter, 1/3 arc second, and 1 arc second resolutions through the downsampling. The downsampled DEMS are then overlaid on and blended into the existing data at these resolutions, which together form our seamless national elevation data set. The blending process includes feathering at the edges of the new DEMS to ensure a smooth visual appearance from older to newer data. And in Alaska, we publish 2 arc second instead of 1 arc second DEMS. The 3DEP standardized DEMS are published as cloud optimized geotiffs and are published to a cloud exposed repository. MRF stands for meta raster format and is a cloud-based web service that contains an index of and overviews of all the images in a data set or a repository. This particular MRF service is indexing the 3DEP repository. The index is updated nightly as new DEMS are published and overviews are regenerated quarterly. The MRF lets us rapidly query DEMS by both area and resolution and return a desired subset of cloud-optimized geotests. It is much more efficient than trying to pull data directly from the repository, and also makes it easier to see the 3-depth data coverage at all resolutions. The third step is where Topo Builder gets involved. Topo Builder has access to the DEMS in order to dynamically create contours in the fourth step. The 1 to 24,000 scale maps use the 1/3 arcsecond or 10-meter DEMS, partly because it's the most appropriate resolution for this scale, but also because it's the resolution for which we have nationwide coverage. When a user represents a map, when a user requests a map on the back end, Topo Builder passes each map's area of interest to an ESRI script that queries the 1/3 arcsecond DEMS from the MRF service that was shown in the previous step. Because the MRF service is so efficient and the compression of the cloud optimized geotiffs makes them easy to load and transfer, Topo Builder takes about 30 seconds to query, return, and mosaic the DEMS for a single 1 to 24,000 scale on-demand topo map. Finally, the contours are created for the DEMS, returned from the MRF query. Contour intervals for US topo were determined with historical surveys and refined cartographic assessments to arrive at per quad intervals. Because we can't rely on this data for automated cross quad contour generation, we use the elevation range of the specified area of interest. Once you have confirmed your customization options and add them to your map cart by checking the box next to the map name, and then click the Add button, which is here at the bottom. And also at this point, note that multiple maps can be selected, and if desired, a subset of those maps can also be added to the cart. Okay, note that the counter next to the word cart tracks the number of items you have added to the cart. Your selected maps and their customizations will be shown here. To change the contour smoothing or format for any map in the cart, just click Edit Maps. Remember to click Save if you made any changes to your maps in the Edit interface. Either button takes you back to the cart. If you are finished adding maps to the cart, click the Checkout button shown here, and a dialog box will appear asking for your email address. Input your email address and then click Checkout. And you will see a confirmation dialog box with email. This email includes individual information about each map in your order, including the type of map and all the customizations you choose. Topo Builder has a 5-day time frame to complete a map. However, usually you will see a response to your map request much sooner than that. Once it is ready, you will receive a second email with a direct download link. The file will be available to download for 60 days, and the link expiration date is in the email. The map delivery email will be shared with, or can be shared with friends, peers, or coworkers who also can download your map from the same link. At any point after placing an order, you can track its status using the order confirmation number given in your confirmation email. Go to the Track tab and enter the order number, then click Track. The tracker will show you what stage of processing your order is in and if it was delivered and what date. Multiple orders can be tracked at the same time. Just enter another number in the order confirmation number box. If you don't receive your email within 5 days, contact the help desk by clicking the envelope icon in your confirmation email. The National Map Topo Builder webpage provides more information on the Topo Builder application, and the user guide is embedded in the application and also linked here. For any user support requests, please contact the National Map Help Desk, and that email is tnm_help@usgs.gov. Now that we've seen the application, let's review the associated on-demand topo maps. Shown here is a popular place called Horseshoe Bend. Some of you may have been there, and it's located within the Glen Canyon Recreation Area on the Colorado River. US topo maps are split up around the bend. But what if you want to see it in one single topographic map? US topo products are 1 to 24,000 scale and produced for the US. They're free and immediately can be downloaded by anyone. But there are no customization options, and the 7.5 minute quadrangles are created in preset 7.5 minute quadrangles. US topo maps are created through a semi-automated workflow, with most of the manual components being tied to annotation and quality assurance review and checks. We produce 1/3 of the country each year, so the maps are no more than 3 years old. With on-demand topos, users are still currently limited to 7.5 minute quadrangle equivalent extent, but the user can center their map over their specific area of interest, so they are not limited to the predefined quadrangles of US topo. These maps are generated on demand using fully automated procedures. On-demand topos offer more recent data than US topo maps, which can be up to 3 years old. US topo and on-demand topos use a similar standard and specification. Here are some, however, further comparisons for the US topo and on-demand topo. For example, the US topo is staged, whereas the on-demand topo is literally an on-demand product. US topo is a standard USGS quad. The on-demand topo has a custom extent. Contours for the US topo are pre-designed, while contours are generated on the fly for the on-demand topo. The US topo is updated on a 3-year cycle, and the on-demand topo is actually using the best available data. US topo is available for free and immediate download, and the on-demand topo, actually the status of this just changed, and I'm excited to let everyone know this. This is just as of January 23rd. That Topo Builder status just changed from being available for a limited time to being here to stay. Thanks to a highly successful pilot project, on-demand topo maps are now a permanent offering of the national map and will continue to be provided on a free and unlimited basis. The The US topo and on-demand topos have similar scales. 1 to 24,000, 1 to 25,000, 1 to 20,000. While the US topo is produced only at these 3 scales, the on-demand topo would be multi-scale in future releases. Let's take a look at some actual visual comparisons so you can see some of the differences and contrasts between these two products. For example, here's the logo identifier for each of the products. And here's an example of the credit notes for each. These are just a couple of examples of the labeling. And here also are just 2 comparisons of contours and trail symbology. As mentioned earlier, users can now select which national map layers they would like on their maps. Our newest release also includes updates to the user interface to make the application easier to navigate and use from a mobile device. We recently added a map tracker to Topo Builder, which allows you to check the status of your map requests and get real-time information on when your maps will be delivered. We are also currently developing the 1 to 100,000 scale version of on-demand topo, which is planned for release in spring 2023. There are some essential facts to know about Topo Builder and the US topo. Topo Builder uses the best available data from the national map to create on-demand topo maps. Topo Builder also allows the user to choose the file format, area of interest, and level of contour smoothness. Additional customization skills and map types are planned for the future. US topo staged maps continue to be produced and are available as free and immediate downloads. To access Topo Builder, again, the URL is shown here. You would go to topobuilder.nationalmap.gov. Please contact the help desk for any user feedback, help, or support. And this would conclude the information that I have for you today and the demonstration for Topo Builder. Thanks a lot for attending and appreciate it. And if there are any questions, glad to answer those.
Do we have any questions in the room? Right this second for Carol? Okay. Well, thank you, Carol. It was fascinating information and good tool to know that's out there. So I'm sure people will reach out if there's any they'd like to further go and explore it. So thanks so much. We appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Our last presenter is in person. It's going to be Jeannie Hayes, right? And we'll just be a second while we get ourselves switched over.
To your desktop, source all of it. It might only be printed out in PDFs. It's gonna be fine. The underlying data. But that's why I was confirmed, because I want to navigate the website.
I want to know who still uses 7.5 minute printed maps. Like they should have given a talk on like new projections that are going to come out, because we have LiDAR data that's now going to make data. That's going to make new data.
I'm guessing maybe it's like people that want to print it.
That would be a more interesting talk. Yeah.
Well, I'm guessing people might
I
want the
think.
topos if they're going camping, you're off, have no reception, they want a printed map and a compass as a backup. I mean, when I go camping, I always take a printed map and compass, just in case.
Yeah, but
It's rare, but it's not ideal, but like.
that's not for work, that's for recreation, and even then. And actually, even then, I would probably use Google first.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
All right.
No, I get it.
Where you drop it a lot.
Thanks for sticking around, everybody. I won't take up a huge amount of your time, but since it's January, we wanted to kind of do a bit of a year in review for what we've been up to as a board, and then kind of give you a sneak peek into some of the planning that we've managed to accomplish for 2023. So I'll just go ahead and start by saying, if you're not familiar with GIS Colorado, we are a group of 9 voting volunteers, all GIS professionals in some way, shape, or form, not necessarily touching GIS data every day so much, but on the peripherals sometimes.